Live today, regardless of the quarantine situation. I'm quarantined in the studio for for the day. But seriously, this is a great way to keep in touch and not be totally discouraged by what's going on out there. I want you to be safe and be smart, yes, but you can be encouraged at the same time. And this is an interesting time when we talk about sort of an old argument, and that is between science and faith. And I personally believe it's a complete false choice to say you either believe in God or you believe in science. Because, I mean, we'll discuss probably some of that today. But, you know, with the virus going on, yeah, we're all pulling for science and we're all asking God to show us how to use science to beat this virus. I mean, to me, they work hand in hand if they're working properly. Anyway, so jump on in here. Chat is open. If you want to share this, if you've got especially younger people in your life, I know I've got 4 children, so I've got some spouses and friends, and this is a whole generation that is going through what every generation goes through, and that is this struggle with, you know, who is God? Who am I? Why am I here? Is God real? Some very foundational questions. They're good to ask. And if you're older, like me, and I'd like to deny it, but, you know, hey, I'm 50, so we need to have answers. We need to be able to have the conversation. We don't need to just say, you know, go to church. We need to be able to interact with people. So today I have Raul Garcia, and he is a self-described former atheist, okay? And so this is someone who has gone through what a lot of the younger generation has gone through, what every generation has gone through, and that is asking questions and looking for answers, and he found some answers, and so we're going to talk to him. So jump on in here, share this, especially if you know someone in your life who's struggling with the basic questions of who is God, is he real? You know, hit share right now. Raul, how are you doing?
I'm good.
You nice and safe and quarantined?
I am it's nice and safe in quarantine. Yes, sir.
Okay.
I
Good.
am. It's interesting what's all going on, and in the midst of this conversation, how it all just comes together. It's interesting to me with how the whole church and everything dynamic is responding to this whole thing. You know,
Let me ask you this. How, if you don't mind me asking, how old are you?
I am 24 today. I just turned 24 on Sunday, actually.
On Sunday. All right. Well, belated
I
happy
still
birthday.
feel 23, if that even is a late.
Right, of course.
But I guess I have to start changing it up, just like a date, right? When you change years, you kind of still keep saying the last year until it kind of starts to sink in a little bit. Same thing with my age.
Okay. 24. You still don't get the auto insurance break, so you're not there yet.
No, I haven't gotten that break just yet.
So you are you seeing people in your age group, roughly, kind of asking more questions now, especially, you know, how could a good God let a virus loose on the earth? I hate that we call it an act of God. I think that's a misnomer. But is there any kind of focus on some core issues right now in the midst of a crisis?
You know, I think what I've been noticing, and I, as I have conversations with people within my age group and also through the Bible studies that I'm involved in and such, I've found that it's actually coming a lot from a Christian perspective of there's 2 dichotomies going on, which is the atheist is kind of saying, look, this is evidence for where is God and how does he fit in this whole, right? Which is the whole argument, God of the gap argument, right? We start injecting God in the questions we don't have as people that are seeking truth. And then the atheist starts to fill in the atheistic view on these situations when we have no answers as the church to why this is all happening. But I think through people my age or people of any age, we've found that if we really study that book, really, coronavirus is not something that historically is unknown. I mean, I was just having this conversation yesterday that, you know, plagues, sicknesses, I mean, we forget that we interact with a world that the Lord wrote 2 books. That book that we study, and we it's our owner's manual to Christianity. But he also wrote the book of life, right? The laws of gravity, the laws of physics. This entire world's another book we get to read, and they're a perfect handshake between the two. They don't contradict each other. To your comment about science, they're both hand in hand. They work with each other. They don't contradict. So I think that's really where the conversation has started for me, with a lot of people asking these questions about the virus and eternity, and these real questions that starts to sink in.
All right, so back up a little bit and tell us your story as someone. You say you were an atheist. Just unpack and tell us your story.
Sure. So, I always say this, it's a long story, so I'm going to do my best to not get caught in the weeds of the story, because it leads into a lot of questions, as you probably know and understand. But, I wasn't an atheist up front, and I don't think anyone could really say that up front at the beginning. But I always say questions are good. However, questions without answers, or at least wrestling with them, can become doubts. And doubts can then become unbelief, and then unbelief becomes disbelief, meaning an opposing, antagonistic perspective to anything that the world presents, and you just have an opposing view to it. You're not open to it, you're not even opening to listening to it, and all of a sudden you disbelieve it no matter if it's true or not. You're not even open to it. And that's kind of what my circumstances and my experiential life kind of led to. I recently was just reading it a few minutes ago, just because sometimes I have to watch myself with my own story, because how many things our story continues to get written. Um, I was born in Colombia. I got here when I was 6 years old to America with my family, and my family was very close to me. We're Hispanic, so family unit is very tight. However, throughout the early stages of my life, my parents had a really rough marriage. They kind of got married out of just my mom having an innate, and I'm saying this all with permission, but an innate desire to have kids. They were best friends. They weren't really, I guess you could say, that they didn't go through premarital counselor. They didn't really follow the Christian biblical principles to do it. They just kind of fell into the sense of need and kids and family, and we're running out of time, so let's get married. And voila, here I am, and here's my brother a few years beforehand. And as years passed on, there was no real relationship. There was definitely no foundation. There was no truth. There was no scriptural context, the covenant. And it created this gap in their marriage that by the time I was 10, my dad left, bitter and angry and resentful to the relationship that they had. And it led me to see this image and this reflection of what marriage wasn't supposed to look like. And I was so unsold on marriage just because of the fighting, the arguments, the teardowns, this dynamic I was seeing and I was being exposed to from the moment I was born to now 10 years old, that one day my dad just picks up and leaves. And after he leaves, none of us know where he's at. He leaves me. Gateway actually wrote the story. I mean, I have to remember, I was reading it just to remember the details of all of it, because it's been so long. He leaves and he drops me off at school. He hugs me. He wasn't the physical attention guy, so all of a sudden I'm kind of sitting there, why did he just hug me like that? He's never done that before. That afternoon he doesn't pick me up from school, and I'm trying to figure out, well, what's going on? My mom doesn't know where he's at. My brother doesn't have a clue. Nobody knows where he's at. We're all in tears that evening because nobody knows where dad's at. And we kind of fall into this place where by the end of the night, my dad calls and I pick up the phone. I'm like, where are you? Where are you? He's like, where's your brother? I didn't get to say goodbye to him. Where is he? I'm like, where are you? And he just says, it's all your mom's fault. She's the one to blame. I'm done. This is over. And I'm sitting there as a 10-year-old thinking, what? And he then hangs up the phone because my brother's not home yet. And I ran as a kid. You don't sit there and put mom or responsibilities or context into the situation. You're just emotionally led. And I just blame my mother. I tell my brother the story. We have enough evidence to see when my mom would get in a fight with my dad. So like, yeah, it really is her fault. And in the meantime, we find out later my dad's in Colombia, where his family is at. And he just fled over there, and we're over here in turmoil. For the next year and a half, me and my brother turned into these just rebellious, angry, bitter, pissed off, to say the least, just adolescents. I run away. My brother starts running away. I was the kid working for nightclubs and events in Miami Beach when I was a freshman and 8th grader. I mean, I was just in the world, submerged in it. My family didn't need anything. And about a year and a half later, after pleading my dad to come back, he comes back, and He tells me that he's back for me, and that's my birthday present. I'm sitting there, okay, I'll take it. That's my birthday present. Well, by the time I'm 16, my brother's 18, my parents stayed together because my mom did not believe in divorce, thank God. Um, and I started asking questions. I started trying to ask, well, what led you to leave years ago? And these emotions start rising up. You start becoming more mature, and your mind starts to become more engaged, and these questions start to surface themselves. I always tell people, you want to see what you truly believe, just add pressure to someone, right? Out of the belief, the overflow of your mouth will speak. And that's what happened. These questions started to come. My dad had no answers. He just started blaming my mother. My image of a father started getting distorted, which I'm sure you've seen. I know you've interviewed Lee Strobel. Usually, and I'm not saying this is 100% statistic, most people that profess themselves to be agnostics or atheists usually have a distorted view of what God calls sacred, which is the family unit, and most importantly, usually a father. I can't
Yeah.
associate myself with a good father if I have a very distorted view of a father
Yeah.
in here on earth, right? And that's what happened. And as that story continued, I got to the point that by the time I was a freshman in high school, I wanted nothing to do with God. I wanted nothing to do with religion. I was raised Catholic, which is just a cultural thing to do as a Colombian. I had done communion, confirmation. I didn't know what any of that meant. It was kind of like rules without relationship. Obviously, breeds rebellion, and that's what happens. And by the time I was a freshman in high school, I was studying in Dawkins, teachings, and Sam Harris, and why science is a great answer to just exile God out of society. And I was passionate about it. I really, when people threw their Allah at me, or Buddha, or karma, even if it was just a social construct, I was ready to sit there and just laugh at them. I had enough to be dangerous, but not enough to actually know what I actually believed. And I was judging Christianity by its views. My mentor always tells me, don't judge a worldview by its views. And that's what we often do, right? I judge marriage by its abuse. I looked at my parents' marriage, so I judged it by its abuse. Marriage must not work. I judged Christianity by its abuse. Hypocritical Christians, the church that had no answers in the midst of our turmoil with my family, because obviously we looked at that early on when stuff was going on. And I just started judging the abuse of things, worldviews, and that's what instead just led me to this apathetic, non-sentimental, non-emotional, just moving by the root of gravity into society. And I was a very persuaded and very advocated believer that there was no God. Jesus was no more believable than the Tooth Fairy and Santa Claus and all these other mythical figures.
Yeah.
And
Let me ask you this.
Yes.
Why did that even matter? Why did it even matter whether you identified yourself as an atheist? It seems like understanding that, or at least putting God in His place, at least had some sense of importance to you, that you would even spend any energy or time on it. Was there some kind of wrestling going on? What was going on?
My grandma was my grandma was a very strong believer, really strong believer. She prayed. She always did her quiet time. We had not a clue what she was doing. She was not Catholic by nature. She left the Catholic Church, and in the midst of all this stuff, my dad, my family, my dad coming back, the questions, all that, she's sitting there praying and seeking the Lord, and all of a sudden she gets Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, and she's sitting there telling me that God has a plan and that we just need to fall at our knees. And while my dad left, and while he comes back, and while they're getting in arguments, and while she gets Parkinson's, and while she's losing her mind to Alzheimer's, she can still remember God's name. I'm like, just stop. Like, let's just move on. You have Alzheimer's because you clearly have some type of genetic degenerative disease in your mind. This isn't because God so-called is working this for good, Romans 8:28. It's because you probably just have some type of chemical thing going on in your mind. And I just started making these justifications. Just leave me alone with that. But it caused me to wrestle in my mind with the questions I think every young adult and human being on this earth questions, which is four, and Ravi Zacharias does a great job at this, so I'm not going to steal it, which is origins. Where do we come from, right? We all are going to eventually ask ourselves that. Where do we come from? Are we all just spontaneous combustions over a period of time, and here we are, here's Raul and here's Randy? Or is there an innate reason why we're here, and where is that original aspect of ourselves coming from? Meaning, why are we here? Which is my second point. And uh, destiny, right? Where are we headed? And we wrestle with these deep minded questions, usually when we are going through suffering and trials and tribulations, and the scriptures are clear about them. So I started wrestling with those questions, and I started wrestling with an innate identity problem that I was having. And Christianity, religion, didn't really have much answers for me, and I just started falling into a passionate atheistic because it just made sense. I always tell people, most people will fall into something that makes sense up here, and therefore they will become passionate about it in some way, and that actually will be good, or it could be destructive in nature.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and
So
that's what happened to me.
what? Yeah. What was your what led you to God? I mean, because you look at the circumstances, and you are you're doing what is very common, what in a lot of ways does make sense. With the trouble in your family, with your grandmother suffering. Asking questions that you're not necessarily getting answers to. What finally led you to God, to Christ?
You know, I'm gonna also quote Lee Strobel here. His wife had an experiential faith, right? And he had a much more evidential faith, right? He wanted the facts, the nitty gritty, the real questions. He wanted them answers. He wanted cold hard truth. And his wife was just going through this experiential encounter after encounter after encounter. Well, it actually, I was a mixture of both. I had two. So when I moved to Texas 5 years ago now, I actually moved here to start up a company. It came from another trial I went through, which I was obese, diabetic. I had cholesterol issues because that was a manifestation of my bitterness and resentment and all sorts of other things. I actually got my health together in freshman year, very self motivated, very self promoted. I'm doing this and I'm going to accomplish this on my own. And I did. Obviously, the Lord was using it in the process to that I when I graduated high school, I took this health transformation. I got recognized by the Might of Pearl, America, and all these other organizations
Yeah.
that led me to get out of the academic world and move to Texas 5 years ago to start this company promoted by my health transformation.
Okay.
And when I arrived here, um, I was very egotistical, very narcissistical. I was very accomplished. I was very, you know what, if I got out of all that and I have this future now in my hands and the world's I feel like in my fingertips, then what else can I not do? And I actually moved to Dallas on my own. I drove out here when I was 18 after graduating high school. And shortly thereafter, my mom was in corporate America. She was a CFO. She
Wow.
hated her job. My dad, obviously, as I've given context to, was not always there as a father or husband figure. And for some reason, she latched on to me in some regards to kind of look for advice and things like that.
Yeah.
And she would call me often and say, "Look, I don't like my job. I don't like this." And one day I just had it. And I just said, "Well, then quit your job, move out here. We'll all live at Uncle's house," which was my uncle that was living here. This was the reason why I moved to Dallas, start the company with him. And shortly thereafter, they're all living here. This business is supposed to help everyone and support everyone. And I call this guy that's supposed to help me launch it in Florida, and he died of cancer. And all of a sudden, we're all bankrupt. Not in a non-literal sense, like literal sense. My dad was declaring bankruptcy.
Wow.
My brother was getting evicted in Florida. He had to move out here as well. I had to get 3 jobs. I was working at 2 restaurants, and I was doing call monitoring at night. And my self-pronounced and superficial and very delusional idea that I thought I had this world and life at my shoulders started to crumble beneath me.
Hmm.
And my family even started asking me, "What are we going to do?" What do you do with an 18-year-old is staring at his family, and they're all asking him, "How are we going to make it out of this?" I mean, that was the reality of my life. I was supposed to support them, not only financially, but in questions and in struggles, because everybody looked at me like I was this just successful kid in school and in college at that point in life. And all of a sudden, everything's going hay bag on a handbasket. And I didn't know what to say. And that, I think it got to a point to your question that I was so angry, so bitter, not at God, because at that point I didn't believe in anything. I was just at me, right? Atheistic is just a selfish ideology, right? You're your own God. So I'm angry at myself. I'm bitter at myself because I'm getting nowhere. And now my family's going nowhere because of me. And one morning, my cousin walks in, my uncle's daughter, and she says, "Hey, get ready." I'm like, "Get ready for what?" She says, "Get ready for church." And I laughed her out of the room. I literally laughed her out of the room. Like, you know who you're talking to right now? Because I don't care who I'm talking to. She's very in-your-face personality, which was good for someone like me at the time. And she says, "I'm serious. Get ready, or you're not gonna eat." And I'm like, "What do you mean I'm not gonna eat?" She's like, "I'm the only one with a job. I'm the only one that's gonna feed you." And it was true. She was the only one with a job at the
Oh
time.
no, oh, we're getting a little
And
jitter.
I manipulated in a good way to get me to church. And I go into church. I actually went to Gateway, South Lake.
Okay.
And when I got to service, I
That's
put
Rob.
my
For people
headphones.
for people outside of here, that a Gateway Church in Dallas Fort Worth area, Robert Morris, his church, and you've seen him online today a
Yes,
lot. Yeah. So go ahead.
yes.
Sorry.
And
Go
at
ahead.
that point, no, you're good. And at that point, the only exposure that I had of church was Catholicism, right?
Yeah.
So, be quiet, listen to the guy up there read. And in my mind, I'm not negating Catholicism. I love my brothers and sisters in Christ in that denominational. But for me, in my reality, it was very oppressive. It was very religious, and I was struggling with it. And then I show up to this church that there's music and the expression of worship, and people are handshaking and they're asking me how I'm doing, and I'm like, leave me alone. Like, you're overwhelmed by that love, but you're not accepting of it because you think it's fake. It's just, there's just no way this is actually real. So I actually did. I forced my cousin to sit all the way in the back. I put my headphones on. I told her I'm not going to listen to any of this, and I ignored the whole service. When I got up to leave, I told her, "Hey, can we go?" And she says, "No, you're going to go get prayer." Again, you don't do that in Catholic church. You don't do that in Catholic church, so I don't know what she's asking me to do. And she says, "No, I'm serious. Go get prayer. The guy up there is going to pray for you." And ironically, my cousin wasn't a born again Christian.
Wow.
She was. It was a social group for her. It was a great way for her to be connected. She was a cultural Christian,
Yeah.
but she wasn't yielded and she wasn't submitted. And we can talk about what that actually means. But she wasn't really following Christ, which is why I always say I'm not a believer. I'm a follower of Christ, right? And she forces me to go to prayer. This guy opens up his arms when I get to the altar and says, "So what's going on? What can I pray for you for?" I'm like, "Look, I don't want to be here. Let's just pretend we did this, so my cousin will get me food and I can be gone." And he looks at me like I'm joking, and I'm like, "No, I'm dead serious. Like, I'm not doing this." And he says, "Look, just tell me what's going on." And he keeps pushing and pushing, lovingly and appropriately. And eventually, I just puke all my problems, my family, my business, my future, my career, the bankruptcy, all of it, because I just told him, and he says, "So what are you going to do with that? I mean, what can you do about it? Nothing. I'm sure you can't do nothing. So can I just go now?" He says, No. We're going to pray. And I'm like, "Oh gosh."
Right.
And he's just like, "Can I?" And I'm like, "Whatever gets me out of here quicker." And he prays for me. And after he's done praying for me, he tells me, "Look, I have a word and I have this visual in my mind I want to share with you. I don't have a clue what that means. I've never heard that before.
Yeah.
That was foreign language to me." And he tells me that he sees these dominoes, and that these dominoes signify the people in my life, and that they're all down, like if they're dead. And it's because of words that I've spoken over them. My life, my future, all of these things are dominoes.
Because I'm sorry, there was a little jitter. You said because of words that were spoken over you, or the words that you had spoken.
Words that I had spoken over my life at that point, right? I was so bitter and so angry at everyone and everything that I just said, "Look, I'm going nowhere now. Obviously, I'm not getting anywhere because of my future." So he's saying that these things are just dead life and dead things in my life, and I'm just I'm the one that's just seeded them into this place of death, right? And he says, however, he says that God at this point is going to start revealing himself to me. And he says God, he didn't say Jesus, which is very important because of my journey. And he says the Lord's going to start revealing himself to you supernaturally, because he's got a land and a field for you to just disrupt. And I'm sitting there thinking, okay. So he says, "Look, I'm just praying over you that if you're open to it, he's going to reveal himself to you. And if you yield and you submit, if you bow to him and you give your life over to him, all of those dominoes will resurrect and they will re-kneel themselves to Christ, meaning your family, everyone around you will come to know him through it."
Wow.
And that sounded really sweet and cute, but it all sounded like Christianese to me at the time.
Sure.
And I walked out of that church. I didn't receive Christ. I didn't walk out of there with any kind of transformation, but definitely a seed was planted. And this is where I kind of lead into the experiential to evidential. I was at a restaurant that night and working as a server, and my manager tells me, "Look, there's a table that nobody wants, You need to go pick it up. It's raining. I don't know why they want to sit out there, but they want to. So go pick it up. And I said, look, I just got this job. I don't know the menu. Tell someone else to do it. And he says, you can either pick up that table or you can get fired. You can walk out. And these ultimatums continue. My cousin, now my manager. And I said, whatever. So I go up to this table. I try to get their order quickly. And this guy just grabs my hand at the table and says, look, what are you carrying that doesn't belong to you and you need to lay down? And I'm sitting there thinking, what? And he says, yeah, what are you carrying? You just look like you got the world in your shoulders and you need to release it. And I'm sitting there thinking, what? And I'm like, what do you want to eat? And he says, clearly you have a busy night. Just order us whatever you want. Just get us a bottle of wine and we'll talk later. And I'm like, okay, whatever. So I go out and I order the most expensive things I could find. and I forget about the table. I kid you not. I didn't even refill their waters. I just ignored them completely. They sat there for 6 hours waiting for me.
Oh my gosh.
They didn't ask for help. They didn't ask complaints. They didn't even ask for their food. Everything came out wrong and they didn't say anything. At the end of the night, my manager says, have you gotten their check? I'm like, they're still here? And he says, yes, they're still here. So I go up to them, I drop their check off angry. You'd think that I'd have at least some humility at that point, but no. I drop the check off and this guy says, no. We want to talk to you. I'm like, about what? He says, we want to know what's going on in your life. Same thing the pastor does. He starts pressing and probing and asking. And eventually, just to get him out of my face, I puke all my problems on him. My family, my future, my questions, my doubts, all my stuff. And he's like, wow, that's a lot. How old are you? I'm like, I'm 18. Welcome to my life. And he says, wow, well, let me pray for you. I'm like, oh, goodness. So he prays for me. And I kid you not, his wife then looks at me and says, I have a word for you.
Oh,
and
no.
he literally says the exact same thing.
Dominoes and all?
Dominoes and all. And I'm sitting there thinking, what?
Yeah.
What's going on right now? I kid you not, I told them, all you people have a script. And she's sitting there looking at me like, what do you mean you have a script? I'm like, the same thing you just said was a pastor. You guys either go to the same church or you get the same script. And she's like, no, that's the Holy Spirit. I'm like, oh,
right.
You're full of smokes and mirrors. That's what you are.
Yeah, you think you're being punked.
Yep. And I scoffed at her. And the guy, her husband, puts a little piece of paper in my apron and says, look, this is my phone number and my name. There's a men's group tomorrow morning I want you to come to. I tell him that sounds like a cult. I'm not into anything like that. Please leave me alone. And he says, look, if the Lord wants you to be there, you'll be there. I leave the restaurant that night. I go to work out at the gym. It's about 2 a.m. and I get a random call to my phone, and it's a server, the head server of the restaurant. He says, hey, man, I know you need the money, and I heard you talking to that table. Can I take your morning shift and you take my night shift? And I'm like, why would you do that? You make more money at night. He's like, exactly. You need the money. I'm like, yeah, but why would you do that? He says, because I heard you got something going on with that table, and I got family stuff. So it works out perfectly. And I'm sitting there thinking, what? I put my phone back in my pocket, I take the shift, and I could not stop feeling that piece of paper that he had given me.
Mm-hmm.
I ended up going to that group. It's a men's Bible study in South Lake, Texas. I have gone to it to this day militantly since. And from that, just to speed up the story, it didn't stop. At that men's Bible study, I had another encounter. The same guy said the exact same word. And for the next 6 months, it didn't stop. People handing me envelopes with our rent to the penny while we were going bankrupt. I mean, just nonstop experiential encounters that you can't put fact or reason or logic to it. You're just sitting there and you're thinking, what is going on right now? Do I call it karma? Because, well, karma wouldn't be in my favor because of all the crap I've done.
Yeah.
So what's going on? Well, 6 months later, I'm at Gateway again, church we were mentioning a minute ago, and I go to meet a girl, actually, who I had met at the restaurant, and she didn't show up, and I'm stuck in the service, and the message is actually, how many more times do I need to reveal myself to you? And it was like this movie just plays out in my head at that time. And I see every encounter that I had encountered that obviously the Lord was revealing himself to. And at that point in time, because most people sit here and think like, oh, okay, so that's great for you, but that didn't happen for me. I'm like, well, that's great. Well, I didn't receive Christ at that point. At that point, I fell at my knees and I said, okay, let's pretend that there's a God. Let's pretend that there's some type of divine supernatural encounter here going on. However, I'm in Texas. This is like the belt buckle of the Bible Belt. Of course I'm going to call you Jesus. If I was in Saudi Arabia, I'd be calling you Allah. If I'd be in Malaysia, I'd be calling you something else. If I was sitting in Mexico, I'd be calling you Mary. If I was sitting in different geographical locations, I'll be calling you something else. So I can't call you Jesus. Maybe there's a God. Maybe you can get me to that point, right? Lee Strobel does his case for a creator, and then he does his case for
Yeah.
Christ.
Yeah.
And it was the same thing for me. I was just like, maybe there's a God, but Jesus, I mean, come on, right? Raising from the dead, he walked this earth, fully man, fully God. God needed a son. What? Holy Spirit. I mean, that's just too much. And after that, I committed myself to do this case, not for Christ, it was case for God. And I actually did it through Islam. I studied the Quran, I studied the Sharia law, I studied the Hadiths, which is the traditions. I started studying Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, Shintoism, and I started studying all these scriptures. And really, it wasn't to make a case for it, it was actually to make a case to debunk them,
Yeah.
because I didn't want this to be truth. I always do this, and I always say this to young people. I was 18 years old. I used to be obese, and I'm usually pretty raw about this, so just hear my heart here. The only thing, this isn't how I think now, but this is how I was thinking then. I'm 18 years old. This guy, this God is trying to reveal himself to me. I'm looking into his faith, and there's certain implications behind it. Marriage, I don't believe in marriage. Sex before marriage, I don't believe in that either. Purity, holiness, godliness, righteousness. And I'm 18. I just lost 90 pounds. I'm starting a company. It's starting to take off at that point in time. And this guy named Jesus wants me to wait till marriage. Do you truly want it? You think I wanted this to be true?
Mm.
Like, do you think I was relentlessly pursuing and hoping that that book was true? I was relentlessly trying to make sure that this book was false, because I didn't believe in marriage. I got my first job at 15 to pay for my parents' divorce. My mom said no, she would not divorce because she believed marriage was a covenant,
Yeah.
even though she didn't really know what a covenant was, but at least she
Mhm.
believed the principle behind it.
Sure.
And I was so persuaded that I didn't want this to be true that I was actually making a case to debunk all of these religions, because I didn't want God to be true. I thought this was all just a hoax. So I always tell people, all I wanted was to get laid. I wanted to have sex. I wanted to have alcohol. I wanted to literally keep doing what I was doing. And if these good things kept happening, let's call it karma, just for sake of conversation. But for the next 6 months, I debunked Islam, and I don't say this arrogantly. It was pretty simple to debunk the Islam faith. It was a little bit more difficult with Hinduism because there's way too many gods. And and I went through all of these religions, and Christianity. When you start studying the evidence for Christ, and not just the historical figure of Jesus, because there's people that don't even believe he walked this earth, but you start studying the messianic prophecies, which people obviously do that, which obviously people say, well, yeah, but Jews don't believe in that. Okay, well, then you can study the archaeology. You can study, obviously, not only the archaeology, the historicity of Jesus, but you can study the morality. Where does right and wrong come from? You can study just the foundation. Then you study Roman culture. People say that he didn't really die because our faith is founded on the crucifixion and resurrection of Christ, right? So that's where I, obviously, in least Strobel, most people go to. I actually just wanted to debunk that he even existed. Well, when I started realizing that there were people that were atheists and Pharisees and Sadducees, people that were adamant to not believe, and they're coming to believe.
Mm.
There's Eusebius, there's Josephus, there's Quandrelip, there's all these figures. They're just historical figures. They're backed by evidence. I'm speaking to those that are listening.
Mm.
And you're realizing that all these people also were completely against believing in this guy named Jesus, and their worldview after they're looking at the evidence is changing too.
Yeah.
Like me, what do you do with that? Forget about the Bible, because people say, well, that book is not reliable. And I'm not saying the heck with the Bible. I'm just saying from an atheistic
Right.
perspective.
Right.
Let's pretend that the Bible isn't true. That doesn't mean Christianity isn't, because famous apologists have said this. Christianity will still be true even if all Bibles were burned. Jesus still did the things that he did. He still walked this earth. We may not have the principles and the values and the things that we get from that book, but we still have the fundamental aspect that we have to deal with, which is the fact that there are people outside of that book, atheists, philosophers, Greek philosophers, that were walking and talking about this guy that was magnificent. Even Islam has an entire book on Jesus. They talk about Jesus more than Muhammad. What do you do with that as an atheist? There are people that don't want this to be true, and everyone's talking about him. So my ideology of him not existing, eventually, I always tell people, you have to make a verdict. My mentor, um, he's a former DA of San Antonio. He's an apologist as well. He looks at things like a lawyer with
Yeah.
reason and logic, and he says, the world's your jury. You're presenting a case to them. So you got to do something called Baudire, which is you
You got
look
to do
at
some
things.
what? I'm sorry, you were cutting out.
Baudire. It's a French word. They do this when they're looking at jury selection, right?
Okay.
They're kind of figuring out. They're throwing out questions. They're throwing out. And
Yeah.
they're figuring out if that
Yeah.
person should be in the jury or not.
Yeah.
And you're
Yeah.
doing
Been
that
through
with the
that.
world.
Yeah, I've actually been through that.
Then you know that. Then you understand that. And we all go through this every single day. And everyone as a young adult needs to understand that the Lord's doing Baudire with us. He's revealing things to us in a way where it will captivate us personally, and we have to understand him relationally in a way that we understand that not only the historical, the archaeological, the messianic, the all these questions. Evil is another one, right? Well, what about all these evil things, like to your
Yeah.
point with coronavirus? We can't define good if we don't have evil. There has to be a standard. Evil doesn't exist if there is no good. Right? That was my biggest problem as I was going through this journey, is how am I sitting here defining who God is and what's wrong with God when I'm borrowing from his book to justify my unbelief.
Yeah, right.
Right? I'm justifying my lack of morality and saying, well, rape and marriage and anger and bitterness and immorality and alcoholism and all these things that I wasn't doing myself, but I thought they were wrong. Well, how do I know they're wrong? If you're an atheist, that means you're a naturalist or a materialist. That means that everything's just chemically combusting and it's just random and it's just happening. Well, last time I checked, the lion doesn't look at the zebra and say, well, he probably has a mom. He probably has some kids. I can't eat her. There's no reason. There's no morality going on. He eats the zebra because he can and because he will. And I'm sitting here thinking, well, no, I want to reason through things. Well, where did that come from? Where does this moralistic, this fundamental heart transformation struggle is coming from? And that's the Imago Dei. That's the image of Christ that we all have inside of us. The fact that you're struggling and you have questions, it's something he injected into you. So you could wrestle and struggle and build a relationship that's stronger with him.
So what was the tipping point for you?
After I studied the resurrection and I studied the crucifixion, because my biggest struggle after I believed he really walked this earth, and he was an amazing person, I really did. And I was like, you know what, this guy was an amazing person. He really was who he was. I started making excuses for him not really rising from the dead. And I was like, there's many theories out there, Maybe it wasn't Jesus on the cross. Maybe it was someone else on the cross.
Right.
Maybe he didn't die. Maybe they took him off the cross before he died. Well, if you study Roman culture, Romans were excellent murderers. Like, if the person that was in charge of murdering that individual didn't accomplish that mission, he was going to get murdered and beheaded too. So last time I checked, if you have something to do and your consequences is death, are you going to make sure that person dies? I mean, I'm asking that question to the audience, to those that wrestle with that. And I had to ask that question to myself. And I realized it takes more faith for me not to believe.
Yeah, I'm sorry, you dropped there again. You said it takes more faith for you not to believe?
It's going to take me more faith to not believe in this guy named Jesus. And I had to make, at the end of the day, in anything we believe in, I always tell people, when you get on a plane, you have faith that that pilot has the credentials to fly you over the sea, the ocean, and the world at 50,000 feet above the land. When you ask your doctor what medicine you should take, you're putting faith in him that he's not going to poison you.
Yeah.
We put faith in things all day long, yet for some reason we have a problem in putting faith in someone that not only has evidence for being absolutely nuts about you, but he has more evidence for things that you're struggling with, and he wants to walk with you, like this season we're all going through with the coronavirus.
Yeah.
That really, it should create a sense of desire to look into it. But the problem is, and this is what I encourage young people to do, is, are you in a truly relentless pursuit of truth, or are you just in a relentless pursuit of happiness? Because if you're just pursuing what makes you happy, the moment Jesus gets in the room, you're going to realize that there's some implications that don't make you happy at front.
Yep.
Now, if you realize that the things he's going to maybe have you sacrifice, there's an immense amount of value. I didn't know I was going to become a business owner like I am today. I didn't know I was going to have a ministry. I didn't know I was going to be able to lead my mom to Christ. and give her a purpose and hope. Not that I
Okay.
did that, but because I played a part in it.
Uh-huh.
I didn't know I was going to be able to lead my brother to Christ. I didn't know that I was going to see all this come from it. But that's the thing. I always tell people, your destiny's on the line.
Yeah.
You're never going to know what that life looks like with Christ if you don't even at least give it a shot.
So you led your mother to Christ, you led your brother to Christ. What about your father?
My dad was the tough nut.
Give us the short version.
However, his evidence, and it's funny because he'll say this too, his evidence for Christ and his relationship, yes, because he did come to believe in Christ, was through him seeing my transformation.
Wow.
It wasn't through me telling him to profess God as a savior.
That is powerful.
It was just him seeing me because of how bitter and angry and resentful I was toward him, and he started seeing that transformation in me. And I'm not going to stay here and lie and say that it's peaches and cream. Me and him wrestle through this every day because I'm still a logical person.
Yeah.
I'm still reasonable. God calls us to forgive, but it's sometimes very hard to forget. I understand that. But we have to understand that forgiveness is not just for that person. It's for you as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think that is the most powerful argument ultimately for Christ is the transformation of lives. And so, you know, a lot of times we try to be the lawyer. We need to be the witness. We need to just tell what we've seen, what we know, and then be who God has made us to be. And it's a powerful testimony. Man, we're way long, and I'm okay with that.
Okay.
But
forgive me for that.
No, it's a great story. I want to at least let people know. First of all, in case you jumped in the middle, this is Raul Garcia, young man, business owner, an apologist now. Can I call you an apologist at your young age?
You can.
Okay, great. And he does some things online. So, I mean, if you want to get into some more depth of these things, if you know somebody that is seeking and wants to hear from somebody who's been through the process, been through it recently, and in some ways, I would argue, as we all are, still going through it, still working through things, still asking questions. And I think that's healthy. I'm going to show you his Facebook page. It's called R-Rated Christianity, and tell us what the R stand for so you don't confuse people.
Absolutely. It's controversial, so I always tell people R stands for real, raw, and redemptive, which is ultimately the goal, conversations that the church, and I'm not talking about your church, I'm just talking about the Big C church, is struggling to answer, and Satan then is invading. I always tell people, and this isn't me, this is my mentor, which is the person you see mostly speak on this ministry. I'm more of the support system on behind it. I answer a lot of the questions behind it, is whatever we as the church avoid, the Satan says, well, I'll take that. Marriage, oh, you don't talk about that? I'll take it. You don't talk about sex? Oh, I'll take that. All these subjects that we don't want to talk, maybe they're uncomfortable, maybe they're taboo, maybe they're just, I don't want to talk about that. Satan says, well, I'll take it, and I'll distort it, and I'll corrupt it, and I'll make it my own truth in your own mind. So we unfilteredly, uncompromisingly, hopefully, redemptively talk about these topics so you can get past those. And we are in a conversation, so you can just ask questions and we'll engage with you.
Yeah, and who is the person that leads that?
Yeah, so that's my mentor. His name's Nico LaHood.
Okay, that's his name. Yeah.
Yes, and I'm kind of on the back end. You won't see my face much because we live it on San Antonio. I'm the one that's answering the questions through the chat.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll come on the show, but it's rare. And it's between me, Tyler, and then George, which for a lot of those that are listening that are more theological and they're Christians, but they're more, well, I don't have questions. I have more scriptural and things like that. George Arugio, which also he comes on sporadically to the show. He's getting his master's in science and theology and divinity in Biola. And he also actually teaches with William Lane Craig and several other pretty strong apologists in the ministry.
Cool. So check that out if you want to go deeper or if you want to recommend it to somebody. Again, it's R-Rated Christianity on Facebook. So you go to Facebook and then, like you see in the search bar up top, just type in R-Rated Christianity and you'll see this image right here. So when you get that, you know you're in the right place. Nico LaHood, you can see the name there as well, is probably another good name to search for that. Raul, man, I appreciate you sharing your testimony, and I know there's more to it, and we could probably spend more time talking about things. And we'll have to come back. I think maybe we should come back here after the whole virus thing settles down, and maybe hit some of the questions that people are asking, and deal with some of the things that you're dealing with over there in that other group. You know the top questions people are asking because you're sitting there answering.
Yes.
So.
And I'll say
Yeah.
this before we go,
Yeah.
and whoever's listening right now, a lot of times, and I do this when I get the opportunity to speak in schools or whatever, or colleges, that many times in the church, and I'm talking about the small C church, meaning pulpits and congregations that we all congregate together, we many times have topics that we talk about. Either that's just identity or relationships or tithing, or it doesn't matter what subject that is. We usually talk about these topics. We need to talk about them. However, we have a congregation of 100 people, 40 people, or maybe 4,000 people, that maybe 50% plus of them are all struggling with marriage or pornography or the reality or the historicity of Christ, or just questions, just suicide. I mean, you'd be surprised at the questions I've gotten.
Hmm.
And they're struggling, and then you're like, well, that's just one or two people. And then when you survey them, it's like 40% plus that they're struggling, and you realize, oh my gosh, we're talking about marriage, but the cancer of the issue in our congregation is actually this. So I always say this: if you guys all have questions, I'm sure you guys do this, send them in or send them to R-Rated Christianity, whatever, it doesn't matter. And me personally, I'm passionate about dealing with it. I don't want to put a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. I want to truly diagnose, figure out what's wrong with those that are listening. Not that there's anything wrong with you, but just obviously we're all struggling with something, even myself included. And why don't we just do surgery? We go in, we see what the root of the issue is, and we deal with it. We don't try to take water out of the boat. We actually figure out where the hole in the boat is, we plug it, and then we take the water out.
Yeah. Good, man. Appreciate you. Appreciate everything that you're doing. Keep doing it, and I hope God continues to bless your business so that's not a burden, but instead of a blessing. And I know you hang around
Amen.
Robert Morris. He will talk a lot about that, and so we wish the blessed life on you and all of yours.
Oh, thank you, brother. I
To borrow a
appreciate it.
phrase from Robert. And
Please.
all you guys out there's somebody needs to hear this. So wherever you're at, point people to this location, to this interview. You can find it in the archives and share it, because it's just one, a powerful story about God pursuing someone, revealing himself even to the skeptical mind. And so let this be a valuable resource to you. And I was supposed to mention this at the very top, so well, you'll see graphics going out. My dad's going to be on tomorrow, and he's going to talk about the coronavirus, the issue, a lot of things kind of surrounding it as we go through this difficult time. So my dad, James Robinson, will be here live tomorrow on Life Today Live at noon. So all of you guys join us and share it when we go live, actually. And thanks again for being here today. Share this one, and we will see you again tomorrow on Life Today Live.
Most of you all the time want what you want.